Now, video game development sure is a costly business, where even the greatest slam dunk idea has no guarantee of turning a profit, but on the other hand, there are also some games that are clearly never going to be anything more than a money pit, and that's unfortunately what we're here to talk about today. As I'm Jules, this is FGS, and these are 10 video game failures that cost millions. But you know what, I can't talk nickels and dimes without some sense thrown in as well, so I've had the foresight to rope in Jim the Fly's comment from last week's episode. And if you want to be part of next week's episode, then have a think about what you'd pick for things that modern video games just need to stop doing. So with that in mind, let's get on with this episode. Number 10. Aliens Colonial Marines. A first-person shooter sequel to James Cameron's all-timer sci-fi flick Aliens should have been a commercial sure thing, but when you combine the high costs of licensing named IP with a rocky 6-year development cycle, financial catastrophe was all but guaranteed. Colonial Marines was pummeled by critics for its abundance of bugs, shambolic AI, dated graphics, and brief length, though in retrospect, the latter actually might have been a blessing in disguise. Despite the pedigree of Borderlands developer Gearbox and the easy appeal of Colonial Marines as concept, they whiffed it in basically every way possible. Couple this with reports about members of the development team being reassigned to other projects and large chunks of the game being outsourced to other studios without Sega's knowledge, and it's easy to see how this no-brainer of a video game was mismanaged into the grave. Reassessing the debacle a few years later, Gearbox CEO Randy Pitchford revealed that he lost $10 to $15 million of his own money on this game, and yet, compared to everything else on this list, that's actually small potatoes. Number 9. Shenmue 1 and 2. Beloved though it is, 1999's legendary action-adventure game Shenmue, I'll stop doing that, was a colossal money sink for Sega, whose irresponsible spending ensured that there was never any possibility of it ever turning a profit. Though precise figures are tough to come by, this game had a budget from anywhere between $47 to $70 million, making it the most expensive video game ever made at the time. More to the point, it was a sweaty palmed figure for a game launching exclusively on Sega's ultimately doomed Dreamcast console. The Dreamcast's low install base basically meant that Shenmue effectively had to shift a mathematically impossible number of copies in order to make a profit, far from the 1.2 million that it eventually sold. While Shenmue's unprecedented scope and meticulous attention to detail made it clear where the money went, it was obvious to anyone looking in that the game was going to lose Sega many, many millions. But because they'd already sunk so much into developing Shenmue 2 alongside it, the sequel did indeed release in 2001 and, like its predecessor, bombed at retail. We'll probably never know precisely how much money Shenmue 1 and 2 lost collectively, but considering that neither Sega nor anybody else would touch the series with a barge pole for almost 15 years, at which point Shenmue 3 had to basically be partially crowdfunded, it's clear that Sega got absolutely rinsed on this one. Number 8. Daikatana. Perhaps gaming's all-time monument to developer hubris, Daikatana was the FPS brainchild of John Romero, a chief designer on the groundbreaking likes of Wolfenstein 3D, Doom, and Quake. The sci-fi shooter was intended to be the breakout blockbuster title for Romero's new studio, Ion Storm, and the game's chest-beating marketing campaign dripped with what would ultimately be outrageously misplaced confidence. Daikatana's infamous poster featured not a single glimpse of the game itself, but simply the phrase, "John Romero's about to make you his bitch." The obnoxious promotional tactics did not endear Daikatana to journalists nor the gaming public, which combined with a strained development cycle caused enormous skepticism about the game leading up to its eventual release. The budget grew to an estimated $30 million, requiring Ion Storm to sell 2.5 million copies in order to turn a profit. But amid scathing reviews for its dated, bug-riddled gameplay, Daikatana ended up shifting just 40,000 units in its first 6 months, making it a catastrophic financial failure in the many, many millions. Number 7. Darksiders II. Even accepting the commercial success of action RPG Darksiders, you have to question THQ's decision to spend a stonking $50 million on the sequel, seemingly amid the belief that Darksiders had what it takes to become a genuine blockbuster property. In 2012, that was a spend typically only afforded to sequels to a bona fide smash hit, not games that merely performed well above expectations as the first one did. And though Darksiders 2 was well received by critics and players alike, there was nothing within it that indicated a tentpole-sized production budget, at which point you have to ask, where the hell did all the money go? As such, it wasn't even remotely shocking when THQ reported that the game failed to meet sales expectations despite shifting 1.5 million copies, because the budget clearly needed it to do the numbers of a far more popular franchise. The lost millions contributed to THQ declaring bankruptcy a few months later, after which the THQ name and some of their properties were acquired by developer Nordic Games. A third Darksiders did eventually release in 2018, but was bankrolled to the far more reasonable tune of roughly $20 million, allowing it to recoup its costs in just a few months. Number 6. The Fall of Embracer. And so we turn to Jim the Fly's pick for this list, and it's a truly depressing tale if I'm honest. The rise and catastrophic fall of the Embracer Group, or as it should be known, a tale of ambition and greed to abject failure. You see, Embracer Group was a Swedish publishing group that decided to, as business professors would go on to term, go on a bloody mad one, and started buying up developers, publishers, and IP rights like they were going out of style. Their goal was simple: buy them all, flip them all, and make a monstrous profit. However, there was just one problem, and that was paying for the bill once one of their investors pulled out, reportedly taking $2 billion worth of financing with them. Now stuck with a huge and very costly portfolio, Embracer sold off assets quickly to stop the bleeding, and did so at a massive loss. As Jim the Fly points out themselves, they bought Gearbox for over $1 billion and then sold it to Take-Two for well under half that, and the same was true for Saber Interactive. What makes this such a failure beyond measure, though, is the projects that were shelved and the layoffs that occurred through this hot potatoing of properties. And when you consider that 44 studios were closed during all of this, you can only imagine the number of games we didn't get as a result of Embracer's utter botch job. Costing millions, this was costing billions. Number 5. Too Human. Too Human was an action RPG which went through almost an entire decade of troubled development, being initially announced for the PlayStation before later shifting to the GameCube and finally settling on the Xbox 360. Planned as the first entry into an epic sci-fi trilogy, Too Human's budget ended up skyrocketing from anywhere to $60 to $100 million throughout its protracted production, requiring it to be nothing short of a sales juggernaut. But amidst mixed reviews, the game sold only 700,000 copies, ensuring tens of millions of dollars were left on the table when all was said and done. Developer Silicon Knights also lost an almost $5 million judgment by Epic Games, who accused them of misappropriating their Unreal Engine 3 during development. And because that wasn't bad enough, the judge also ordered Silicon Knights to recall and destroy all unsold copies of their games using Unreal Engine, including Too Human. Ouch. Number 4. Defiance. Now, movie and TV tie-ins are inherently expensive undertakings due to the high cost of licensing the IP, and a massive multiplayer third-person shooter Defiance marked an especially reckless roll of the dice. Defiance was a companion piece to the sci-fi series of the same name, which began airing 2 weeks after the game hit the market. That's right, Defiance wasn't actually a known quantity to audiences at this time. Even so, publisher Tryon World spent more than $70 million developing the game over 5 years, an immense risk for an IP with no proven track record. And in a move most observers saw coming miles away, Defiance struggled to gain momentum post-launch, unaided by mixed reviews and a general feeling that it failed to distinguish itself in a crowded MMO market. In an attempt to lure in more players, Defiance went free-to-play barely a year after release. The next hit came in 2015 though, when the Defiance TV series was cancelled, leaving the game to limp along on its own. Now, to the developers' credit, they continued to support Defiance all the way up to 2021, even though the player count had dwindled down to mere hundreds of players years before that. Number 3. APB All Points Bulletin. Now, even Defiance's huge spend seems mildly reasonable compared to how much money was sunk into open-world online shooter APB All Points Bulletin during its 5-year development. Developer Real Time Worlds burned through an outrageous $100 million bringing the game to market, apparently amid the belief that a game that was basically Grand Theft Auto Online before Rockstar Games did it themselves couldn't fail. Hell, rumors even spread during development that Rockstar was planning to buy the game and repurpose it into an official GTA Online title, though of course this didn't pan out. APB launched in the summer of 2010 to mediocre reviews, and just 2 months later, Real Time Worlds entered administration, with the game's servers being shut down shortly thereafter. Though it was rebooted in free-to-play form as APB Reloaded the next year, the game had already hemorrhaged ungodly amounts of dough. Number 2. E.T. the Extra-Terrestrial. Now, at least no other game on this list damn near brought the gaming industry itself close to extinction. Atari's video game based on Steven Spielberg's hit sci-fi movie E.T. was rushed to market with the desire to capitalize on the film's phenomenal box office success. Developed in just 5 weeks, E.T. was unsurprisingly panned for its jank-riddled gameplay and ugly visuals, and though the game was initially a bestseller, its tawdry quality led dissatisfied customers to return their copies in droves. Ultimately, $3.5 1.5 million of the 4 million copies produced were sent back as unsold, leaving Atari in a massive financial bind given that they'd already spent an astonishing $22 million for the rights to E.T. The publisher famously ended up burying hundreds of thousands of unsold copies of the game in a New Mexico landfill. E.T.'s failure contributed to Atari posting losses of over $500 million by the end of 1983, which in turn facilitated a wider gaming industry crash from 1983 through to 1985. Cheers for that. And number 1, Suicide Squad: Kill the Justice League. And finally, we come to not only the most recent gaming flop on this list, but the most immediately costly of all. Suicide Squad: Kill the Justice League marked Warner Bros.' last attempt to break into the live service markets with a DC-themed looter shooter. Yet following a wave of pre-release skepticism from players and press alike, the game launched to wildly indifferent reviews, with many criticising its lackluster launch content and repetitive gameplay loop. Within mere days of its release, the player count fell off a cliff, and so the gaming sphere instantly wrote off Kill the Justice League's long-term potential. And though developer Rocksteady forged ahead with post-launch content regardless, the damage had clearly already been done. Warner Bros. Soon enough confirmed in an earnings call that the game had underperformed, though failed to give a precise sales figure. But it's always a worrying sign. And then, back in May, the company revealed that they'd taken a $200 million bath with this game's release. Now, there are flop games, and then there's Suicide Squad: Kill the Justice League. Warner Bros. Evidently assumed it was just too big to fail, and so invested eye-watering sums of money into creating it, only to find that player interest just wasn't there, in large part just because it wasn't very good. And there we go, my friends. Those were 10 video game failures that cost millions. I hope you enjoyed that, and please let me know what you thought about it down in the comments section below. And if you want to be part of next week's video, then have a think about what you would put as things that modern video games just need to stop doing. As always, I've been Jules. You can go follow me over on Instagram, where it's @RetroJ, but the O is a 0. Hope you're treating yourself well, my friend, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.